Hi guys, Lori here. I'm back for another day of BookMas. This video is one that I'm always hesitant to do a little bit because I'm just hesitant to do it, but I do want to share my worst reads of the year. Now, these are books that I was not that fond of. Most of them I did finish. I did add 2 DNFs at the end of this list. But these are books that I struggled with for many, many reasons, and we will talk about it in this video, and I will let you know at the end of my description if I think I will try another book by this author in the future. So, let's get into it. And again, before I start, if these books are your favorite in the world, that is great. I love that you enjoy the book. Unfortunately, these specific books just did not work for me as a reader. So, the first book we are going to chat about is Never Contented Things by Sarah Porter. Sorry, I do apologize. If it sounds like I'm a little bit congested, it is because I am. So there was a period of like a month and a half that I read a lot of books that went up on this list. I don't know what it was. I just picked up all these books in a matter of months, but Never Contented Things by Sarah Porter was a book that I got at BEA 2 years ago at this point. And everyone wanted this book. This was like the highly anticipated read of the convention. I had read a previous book by Sarah Porter. I had read Bassett in a Night, and I didn't love it either. But I was just off the Cruel Prince train, and I really wanted more fairy reads. This book just was hard to follow. Her world building, I think, is so rich, but it's so confusing. And for me, I had a very, very hard time following it, unfortunately. The characters were weird, and the world building just was super confusing. The ending was really, really open, and the characters were hard to feel connected to. But at the end of the day, I think the world building just was not for me because I was so confused. I was also reading this recovering from being sick, but I just could not follow it, and I really felt no investment in the characters. But the biggest problem with this book was I felt the world building was very, very confusing. I don't know if I'm going to read more fantasy and science fiction by Sarah Porter in the future because her world building is very, very complicated, but I may read some of her mysteries because I know she has one out that caught my attention. But that is my thoughts on Never Contented Things by Sarah Porter. The next book I'm going to chat about is The Me I Am Meant to Be by Sophie Jordan. This was another read that I read like in this 2-week time span when I was recovering from being sick. And I really do like to read contemporaries because they're just fun and they're really, really engaging to read and they're quick. But this book, I just don't know what it was. I felt that it was a very like juvenile read. Like it says it was young adult, but I would say it was probably more like middle grade or even younger than like very, very young middle grade. The characters were really immature and the plot was so not engaging and so not captivating. It follows these two girls and they were both going after different boys, but then they developed a code where you can't date your best friend's ex and drama ensued. It was just the characters weren't that engaging for me to follow and I didn't feel connected to them and the plot was something that I didn't feel was realistic. So unfortunately this went up on this list too. I don't know if I'm going to read by Sophie Jordan in the future. I've heard, I do want to read her fairy tale retelling series, her Reign of Shadows series. I'm hoping her characters have developed a little bit more in the fantasy books, but this book just did not wow me and did not impress me, so that's why it wound up on this list. The next book I'm going to chat about is, I'm so sad this wound up on this list, but sadly, Famous in a Small Town by Emma Mills. I have really enjoyed all of her other books. I really enjoyed Where the Adventure Ends. I adored Foolish Hearts. I still have it. I got it now a couple years ago. This book, I felt like it basically follows this girl and she's a part of the marching band and she's trying to get money for her team to go on like a trip to go to nationals. And she's trying to think of a way to raise money and she has to get this famous music star to come in and do a benefit concert to here. And I liked it. I thought the friend group just wasn't as captivating as normal, and I felt like there was a lot of like little plot points that just did not tie together like in a way that was made sense. Like I felt like there's a lot of plot points that dropped. the romance wasn't captivating, and the story just wasn't as tightly wound or tightly wound as her previous books were. But the friendship dynamics in the story just did not wow me, and I was not a big fan of them. So that's why I wound up on this list. But I will definitely read more by Emma Mills in the future. One of her books is on my highly anticipated read for 2020. Sadly, this book did not impress me, but I'm not giving up on you yet, Emma Mills. I will be back. But unfortunately, that's why this book wound up on this list. I wasn't connected to the characters, and the plot, all the plot elements didn't connect at the end, which I like to see in a contemporary. I felt like it was like a very, very disjointed read. The next book that I'm going to chat about is Top 10 by Katie Cotugno. This book has been on my TBR for a while, I'll be honest. I got it at the first time I went back to BookCon, like after I took a 2-year absence, and I was just getting into contemporary, so I wound up picking this book up. And I will say this book was at a little bit of a disadvantage because I recently read a book called Just Better Off Friends by Elizabeth Eulberg that had a very, very similar presence, and I just wasn't the fan of the way that this book was structured. I wanted a little bit more interaction between the past and the present. Basically what happens is you follow these characters named Gabby and Ryan. They're best friends. They've been best friends for all these years, and then they wind up having sex. This happens in the first chapter. They wind up having sex at her party, and then they wind up going, like, their graduation party, and they wind up going back over their past 4 years of friendship. And I did like the structure. I thought the topics that were brought up were really, really interesting, but I just was missing, like, the moments where these characters, like, connected, like, in the present. I felt like the present part wasn't as captivating as I wanted it to be, and I really didn't I felt like I didn't know the characters in the present anymore. I only knew them in the past, if that makes sense. So it was a little bit hard to root for a romance, like that type of romance. But I thought it dealt with some interesting topics. I just wasn't a fan of the way the writing and also how she constructed this novel. So that's why it wound up on this list. But I do want to read more by her in the future. I know some people really, really like her writing style. So I do have a couple of her books on my shelves, but this one just did not wow me and did not impress me. So that's why it wound up on this list. The next book I'm going to chat about is Phantom Wheel by Tracy Debs. This was another book that I got at BEA the previous year, and it's like a science fiction thriller, I'll say, and it basically follows these 4 to 5 characters. I can't even remember; it's been a while since I read it. That accidentally caused the digital apocalypse, and they have to, like, try to save it. The one thing I struggled with in this book was I felt like all the characters didn't have unique enough voices, so I kept mixing up whose point of view I was in, and it made following these characters' journeys a little bit complicated. And I felt like the science in this book went totally over my head, which was probably my own fault. But the more pressing problem was that I felt like whenever I got into a chapter, I didn't know whose head I was in, and that was, like, really, really confusing. Um, but it was a really interesting concept. I just think that the way she wrote it made it a little bit harder for me to follow and really hard for me to become invested in the characters because they were so different, like their stories were so different, but her writing style made it hard to distinguish who was who. So that's why this book wound up on this list, and I would read more by her in the future just to give her another chance, but I haven't seen it just coming out with any books in the future. And this was supposed to be a series, so maybe we'll get another book in the future, but I'm very unsure, so we'll see. But that's why Phantom Wheel wound up on this list. The next book that I'm going to chat about is We Hunt the Flame by Hazasa Faidal. I think I'm totally saying that name wrong, but that's the next book I'm going to chat about. This is another book that I'm really sad that it went up on this list, and it's an Owl Crate book, and I was so excited for it. And I will admit, the characters in this book just did not capture my attention, and the plot didn't, like, nothing in my book, like, caught me. Like, I was not captured by the world building, I was not captured by the characters, I was not captured by the plot, and it just wasn't as engaging as, like, I wanted it to be, or it just did not keep me engaged to want to keep reading. I did finish it. I don't know if I'm going to read the sequel. I'm definitely going to have to reread this book before I do that because I don't know. Again, this was like in the tail end of my show, so maybe it was just too complicated to be reading at that point. I don't know. I am going to give this book another chance, but for right now, it wound up on this list because nothing about this book grabbed my attention to me to want to keep reading. So that's why this book wound up on this list. The next book I'm going to chat about is one that was surprising to me, and that is The Mysterious Benedict Society by Trenton, I think it's by Trenton Lee, I think. Here's a picture. Sorry, his name is, it's The Mysterious Benedict Society by Trenton Lee Stewart. This book I wanted to love, and I think I would have loved it if it was just a shorter story. I felt like the first half of the story was interesting, and the second half of the story was not as compelling. And I just felt like it was a longer book than it necessarily needed to be. Basically follows these like 4 to 5 characters, and they are on an adventure to try to basically save the world in a sense. There's a lot of mysteries in the book as well that I just went totally over my head. I like the characters, but it wasn't like me reading like Keeper of the Lost Cities and being immediately captured from page 1. And I know it was more of like a realistic story. Like it definitely didn't have like any outright fantasy elements, at least immediately. But it just didn't wow me. I do have all the other books, so maybe I'll give the other one a chance and see if I like it any better. But I always say with first books in a series, you really need to give it at least a book because you have to set up the world building. This book just did not wow me, both with the characters and the pacing and the plot. So that's why it wound up on this list. And the next book I'm going to chat about is actually one of my lowest reads of the year. The only book I gave 2 stars to, and that is The Babysitter's Coven. When you tell me a book is a mashup between Buffy the Vampire Slayer and The Babysitter's Club, I am like totally there. I adore Buffy. I love the Babysitter's Club. However, this book really disappointed me. I almost DNF'd it because I was getting so frustrated with it. But the pacing and the structure of this book was so weird. There was no babysitting really, and the babysitters were not good babysitters, and there was nothing that like captured me. The plot was weird. It was awkward. It didn't feel like it was like a follow through plot in any way, and there was like a big thing that happened that I was so excited for, and then it got totally dropped. So the plot was weird, the characters were weird, and I just had a hard time like reading it, let alone finishing it. I had a lot of issues with this book, a lot of issues, but mostly I struggled a lot with the main characters and their relationship with each other. Just did not wow me and just did not impress me. So that's why this one was my lowest read of the year. I don't even think I'm going to try book 2 because I just felt like the pacing and the plot were really not my jam, and I felt like it was just such a slow read, and it was only like 300 pages, so definitely not a read for me, but I wanted to like it. I mean, it's Buffy meets the Babysitter's Club, but sadly not. So, the next 2 reads are books that I wound up DNFing, and I have a very hard, I've actually talked about this on my channel a lot, I have a very hard time DNFing books. It means do not finish, because I at least want to know what happens at the end, and these were 2 books that I honestly, like, had a DNF. The first one I'm going to chat about is The Wicked Saints by Emily A. Duncan. Now, this was a book that I picked up when I was in my show prep for Wonka, and I just could not follow it, like, at all. I think I restarted this book, like, 3 different times, and eventually just put it down. I still own it. I'm going to maybe consider giving it another shot in 2020 right before Ruthless Gods comes out. I've heard very mixed things about it. I heard it was like a very, very divisive read, but I just was not in the mental space to read it, and then I just didn't feel compelled to pick it back up. So that's why it's on this list, because I didn't finish it, but I may go back to it. The next book I know I'm not going to go back to, and that's Small Town Hearts by Lily Valley. I normally love reading contemporary books in the summer because they're fast paced, they're quick, and I can just like turn my brain off and just read it. And I normally really, really like them. This book, however, was only 300 pages and I struggled so hard with it. I think because I saw the ending coming like a mile away, and I just wasn't as engaged in the characters. I normally love books that have like a strong friendship elements, and this book really didn't have that, and it just did not capture my attention. So that is why I wound up DNFing this book as well, and I know I'm not going to read it again because I gave it away to my friend Justin, so he's much more a contemporary guy than me, so have at it. But those are my thoughts on my worst reads of the year. They're not all terrible. Some of them just did not capture my attention or were not for me at that point. The two books I might consider rereading or at least moving on is I do want to give Wicked Saints another shot. And I do want to read the second book in We Hunt the Flame. And I do want to read the second Mysterious Benedict Society. So those are the three that I'm going to keep reading in some way, shape, or form. But let me know in the comments what were some of your worst reads of the year. And I'll see you tomorrow for another day of BookMas. Bye, guys.